It becomes the gateway to the Zen of gaming. So let's see what's possible when the most creative minds in the world of game development have access to the ideal canvas on which to express their vision. Let's begin by stepping inside the incredible world of Lost Odyssey.
When Microsoft and Hironobu Sakaguchi's newly minted studio Mistwalker first inked their exclusive publishing deal, there were two games the Final Fantasy creator had in mind. One was Blue Dragon, a loving callback to classic JRPGs of the past that would incorporate the art from his famous collaborator Akira Toriyama. The other was more of an expansion on the narratives and gameplay systems he had helped develop during his 20 years at Square. This game, titled Lost Odyssey, would follow immortal characters who have lived for over 1,000 years. These people have lived countless lives, experienced a multitude of happy events, depressing lows, and the never-ending mundanity of life. What struggles could they have faced? What mysteries of life could they have solved? Sakaguchi wanted to think on these questions and explore this uniquely immortal perspective. He wanted to use the medium of interactive games to explore the idea of eternal life in more depth than one might find in a film or novel. Sakaguchi stated this goal in an interview with Cheat Code Central. Through the main in-game story, I directed very particularly to focus on the detailed expressions of the characters. As a result, I believe we succeeded in explaining delicate nuances and showcasing a wide range of emotions. Sakaguchi goes further to say, "The concept is a world filled with conflicts and struggles for power, as the result of artificial strong powers suddenly carried to the world after a peaceful time passes where they were allowed to develop the society slowly and firmly. I wanted to depict a moment when people reveal their ugliness and desiring power. I think that world is close to our own world today, where people are frightened by the idea of a nuclear bomb or new viruses. In that sense, the player will feel the world in this game is very familiar and realistic, although it appears quite different." With these grand goals in mind, Sakaguchi went about creating this emotional narrative with the help of Kiyoshi Shigematsu, a celebrated best-selling author in Japan. Where Sakaguchi would focus on writing the main plot and developing the characters, Shigematsu would create short stories detailing the character's life over 1,000 years. While Mistwalker crafted the narrative and style, they collaborated with Japanese studio Feel Plus, which was created by Microsoft to specifically support the development of Lost Odyssey. Made up of former Square Enix and Nautilus developers, this team began hiring talent throughout the early development of the game before they even had a handle on the Xbox 360 specs. Feel Plus's team struggled with adapting to Unreal Engine 3, at least according to Feel Plus's president, Rei Nakazato. Integration of the Unreal 3 engine was very difficult. Especially, it's not really because it's the Unreal 3 engine, but I guess a lot of my guys are used to making Japanese RPGs, and they have their own philosophy in designing the games. And, you know, we didn't really follow the Unreal Engine philosophy to begin with, so it was more difficult. The most difficult thing was communication. Everything is in English. They have Japanese support, but it's limited. All the good stuff is happening in the news group, but that's in English, and my developers were pretty much all Japanese. Similar to the development of Blue Dragon, Sakaguchi and Mistwalker acted as producers steering the development ship, while a separate studio created the game and implemented the creative vision. In both cases, each studio struggled to work within Unreal Engine 3, especially since it was early enough in the engine's development and the 360's development that they had to figure out a lot of things on their own. The fact that either game is playable is a miracle, let alone visually impressive and enjoyable to play. This common thread of trying to develop expansive games within the next generation of that time shows that Mistwalker's two Xbox 360 JRPGs are indicative of the awkward shift that was happening in the Japanese game industry in the mid-2000s. In a May 2007 interview with GameDeveloper.com, Rei Nakazato discusses the exodus of top talent from the premier Japanese studios like Capcom and Sega. I used to work at Capcom, so I know why Inaba and Shinji Mikami wanted to establish their own company. If a company becomes big and makes some big hits, the company grows. To keep a big company, they have to keep making a profit. To make a profit, a lot of effort goes into sequels for those mega hits. It seems as if the Japanese development studios that were pumping out original titles throughout the 90s were starting to play things safe and sequelize all of their top franchises. While there was still a bit of room for original titles like Eurokami's, Billy Hatchers, and so on, they never got as much support as the franchise titles, your Resident Evils and Sonic the Hedgehogs. So many of the top talents from these top Japanese studios were leaving to form their own companies. These veterans of the JRPG genre made up the staff at Feel Plus and Blue Dragon's Artoon. Despite being relatively new studios, Sakaguchi was still working with experienced developers who were yet unfamiliar with the latest technology. Lost Odyssey was also a multinational development, with Feel Plus in Japan, Mistwalker in Hawaii, and Microsoft in the United States. While Feel Plus and Mistwalker were close enough to maintain clear communications, and both could talk with Microsoft's Japanese branch, it's clear that Microsoft standards created further difficulty during development. From Nakazato again, one thing is the cost. Man-month cost is very high. Not salaries, but being a Microsoft employee is expensive. We have a fixed amount of budget, and with Microsoft's man-month cost, we can only do so much. Recruiting was another problem. We had to recruit a lot of people, and Microsoft as a company has a very high bar to hire people in. The person has to be generally superior in all areas, but game specialists in general are often great in one area and not so great in others. It was very hard to meet all of the hiring criteria that Microsoft had, so it was hard to hire people. I want to set up this context for a couple of reasons. One, Blue Dragon's development did not receive the same level of scrutiny in post-launch interviews as Lost Odyssey. Therefore, I wanted to present a deeper insight into the development of these major JRPGs in a way I couldn't with the previous episodes, including the developers' intentions and difficulties. 2, this series is meant to be a chronicle of the way JRPGs were developed for the Xbox 360, and how the choices these developers made on a console that was DOA in Japan reveal the seismic changes in the industry. Rather than developing engines in-house, more developers worldwide were outsourcing common tools like Unreal Engine 3. Where developers originally had a lot of autonomy and creative freedom, studios were now becoming more cautious with their wallets due to ballooning budgets. As top creative talent began running their own studios, new players in town like Microsoft wanted to work with them to boost their console's legitimacy. All of this setup leads us to the first lavish cutscene from Lost Odyssey, the very first images that greet you upon starting the game, and they live up to the epic ambitions of this multi-disc, millennial-spanning JRPG. From the moment I could walk through the obliterated battlefield, whose destruction I had just witnessed from the next-gen intro cutscene, I was immediately impressed with Lost Odyssey's graphics. Where Enchanted Arms felt like a PS2 game spiced up with some fancy particle effects, Blue Dragon like a barren if beautiful Toriyama background, and Eternal Sonata like a lavish anime pastel watercolor, Lost Odyssey has a grittier, realistic style that feels truly next generation. Its look reminds me of games like The Last of Us or Gears of War, console powerhouses meant to show off how realistically the tech can render the world. Part of this is seen in the character models, which are fairly detailed. They have memorable designs and highly expressive faces. While the colors are fairly muted, everyone has unique clothing that feels like an extension of the world and of their personalities. Kaim's armor is stylish while exuding a quiet power, where Jansen's more lavish cloak and colorful undershirt sell as casual, womanizing ways. During many cutscenes, the cast will react with expressive facial movements that are a large step above the JRPGs released around the time. Rather than simple mouth flaps or canned expressions, the characters often emote with a level of detail not yet seen on the console. Some actions, like body movements and flowing hair, show the game's age, where people move stiffly or hair flows unnaturally. Despite these minor setbacks, I still found myself continually impressed with the quality of the character models. The landscapes and oceans help to make the world feel more expansive despite movement taking place in restrictive corridors. This is especially true in the opening hours, where you spend most of your time traversing mountain ranges, vast beaches, and dense forests. All the while, you can often see far into the distance where large industrial structures and densely populated natural landscapes promise the world's potential, and oftentimes you can visit these landmarks. Each city is impressive as they're often filled to the brim with NPCs and moving parts. As a world where magic has created a boom in technology and human growth, there are towering machines with complex mechanisms and magical energy moving in tandem in every location. Even within the small towns, there's a real sense of life and charm. No matter their size or theme, each city is simply begging you to explore them by speaking to the townspeople and finding the secrets within. Maybe you'll find a new item, the next step in a side quest, or a new entry in the 1000 Years of Dreams. Even if you don't find relevant items, you might speak with a charming local who offers hints or a tiny bit of world building. The pre-rendered cutscenes are, as you would expect, stunning. Similar to Blue Dragon, it's always a treat to see how the pre-rendered visuals actually match the in-game models. While the in-game characters and locations don't have the same amount of detail, they still match up to the more lavish and dynamic cutscenes peppered throughout the story. We've certainly come a long way from even the drop in quality between cutscenes and in-game footage seen on the PS2. This focus on improving the quality of the individual character models, especially in their ability to express emotion through their faces, speaks to the intention of Lost Odyssey's narrative of showing delicate nuances and showcasing a wide range of emotions. Where Blue Dragon felt like an attempt to bring Toriyama's distinct style to life, Lost Odyssey's presentation is meant to provide the most believable emotions using the latest technology. Ironically enough, the most emotional and resonant moments are found not in the main story or detailed cutscenes, but rather within the purely text-based 1000 Years of Dreams. These collections of short stories are framed as Kaim's memories that are slowly returning to him throughout the game. By exploring the world, you can find people and events that trigger a memory and unlock a new chapter in the story. These dreams, as written by Shigematsu, feel more refined and detailed than the in-game dialogue. Coming from a celebrated novelist and short story author, this jump in quality makes sense. These 15-minute short stories do an incredible job at developing characters, creating emotion, and leaving an impact with a gut-punch ending. Yet they're also diverse in subject matter and style. Some cover decades of conflict on a battlefield, some show the passage of time within a small village, and some detail mere minutes in a person's life. The text moves and flows across the screen, often reflecting the actions described in the story. There's also sound effects that help to immerse you in the world of the story. All of these dreams are written with beautiful prose and palpable detail that makes these stories worth reading even outside the game itself. It's fitting then that you can easily access them from the main menu. These stories also highlight the unsurprisingly beautiful score from Nobuo Uematsu. While Blue Dragon's score was more bombastic and fun, reflecting the lighthearted nature of that game, Lost Odyssey's score is epic, sweeping, and at times somber and heartbreaking.
Let's take him now.
Uematsu brings his force of creative powers here to craft a score that is memorable and foundational for the game's narrative and style. The main theme especially is impactful, playing over the main menu to prepare you for the grand journey ahead. Within the 1000 Years of Dreams, this music adds that last bit of punch to make every short story come alive. While the 1000 Years of Dreams contain the brunt of the emotional storytelling Sakaguchi was striving for in Lost Odyssey, the main narrative itself does cover a wider range of emotions, but not with the same level of subtlety he alludes to in his interviews. Lost Odyssey's story follows Kaim Argonar, an immortal mercenary who has wandered the world for over 1,000 years. Despite his millennia of experiences, Kaim is suffering from amnesia and can't remember what brought him to be under the direction of Gongora, a government official committed to advancing magic technology with his magic engine called Grand Staff. The Republic of Uhra tasks Kaim with investigating Grand Staff, as they suspect it's leaking magic energy and poisoning the local wildlife. He is joined by Seth Balmore, another immortal who also can't remember her past, and Jansen, a hired mercenary paid by Gongora to keep tabs on the party. After encountering a magic-infested creature at the entrance of Grand Staff, the party is captured by the army of Numara, a coastal nation in conflict with Uhra. Upon escaping and exploring the city, Kaim discovers his daughter, Lyrium, and her children, Cook and Mac. Despite having nightmares and vague memories of her death, Lyrium is still alive and bedridden from an illness. Upon seeing Kaim after many decades, she emotionally dies and entrusts him to watch over Cook and Mac. Kaim now has parts of his memory returned and realizes Gongora is responsible for taking away his memories and separating him from Lyrium and his wife, Sarah. The party now sets out on a mission to recover their memories and stop Gongora before he can enact his evil scheme, whatever that might be. Their journey takes them across the world, visiting various cities, dangerous caves, and meeting eccentric characters. Along the way, they recruit the help of Ming, the immortal queen of Numara, Tolton, the manipulated former prince of Uhra, and Sed, Seth's son and feared pirate captain.
Sed! It's okay. It's okay.
The narrative itself is fairly straightforward despite taking a disc and a half to truly get started. Before Gongora is fully revealed as the main antagonist, the game spends its time showing interactions between the characters, creating mystery with their pasts, and expanding on the political goings-on in the world. That last point is where the game stumbles occasionally. While the world itself seems to have a rich history that is worth exploring, the cutscenes often get bogged down in the current political struggles that we have little context for. Eternal betrayals, changing from monarchies to republics, and ideological debates often take center stage. This feels like something that could be expanded within the 1000 Years of Dreams, or even within the books that can be found throughout the game world. This focus on the political turmoil is a shame, as the characters and their dynamics are beyond fascinating. Lost Odyssey often strives to move away from some of the tropes seen in JRPGs. Rather than building a party with cliches, each character has some level of depth behind their initial veneer. Kaim is a stoic warrior whose emotional side comes out as the story progresses, lining up with how he regains his memories. By the end, he's more of a full-fledged dynamic character. Seth may be a spunky and headstrong pirate leader who gets plenty of fun moments, but her emotional toils really add some depth to her character. Ming is the queen of Numara, which creates tensions as she must decide between her royal duties and personal passions. Even Mac and Cook, despite their young age, have some depth to them as they feel the weight of carrying on their legacy of their mother and are forced to grow up in the face of a larger evil. Certainly the most divisive character is Jansen.
Whoa! Slow down! Easy! Bruise! Ow!
What a whine.
The comedic relief mercenary who ultimately forms a romantic relationship with Ming. While the romance is certainly half-baked and his jokes are occasionally overdone, I really didn't mind him at all. I found his jokes and little commentaries to be funny most of the time, though occasionally out of place.
Okay, who ordered the seafood?
I was honestly more impressed with the dialogue sound mixing, where they actually include vocal tics, characters interrupting each other, and so on. Jansen feels like the ultimate opportunity to showcase these vocal editing tricks. For the Immortals, their personal stories are more fleshed out in the 1000 Years of Dreams, where their millennium of strife is detailed in short vignettes. Within the in-game story though, they rarely get a chance to develop beyond their initial traits. This is also true for the mortal characters, who exist seemingly to flesh out the party roster. This isn't to say that the mortal characters aren't fun or memorable, they just don't have as much to do within the story as the Immortals, who even then don't do a whole lot in the main game or have a whole lot fleshed out. The cutscenes themselves are at their strongest when the characters are interacting with each other, recollecting lost memories, or working through emotional moments. This is where the most memorable moments happen and the animation is given a chance to impress. Take for example the moment where Kaim's daughter dies from her illness. Kaim's memories have just returned to him as he meets Lirim, his daughter, for the first time in decades. Believing she was dead, this is clearly quite the shock. Despite just reuniting, Lirim knows she doesn't have much time to live and tries to explain the bizarre circumstances to her children, Cook and Mac. The scene takes its time to let the characters speak, to breathe, to feel the emotions. There's even a secret message shared between Kaim and Lirim before she passes on. The tears roll down everyone's face, each face showing a range of emotions that reflect the melodramatic acting. Even Jansen and Seth have their quiet, reflective expressions as Lirim's family mourns her loss. While undeniably melodramatic, the animation and voice acting are more impressive than anything we've seen thus far on the console. It's all a part of the medium's growing pains at the time. In essence, Lost Odyssey's cutscenes and voice acting paved the way for future titles to refine these emotional moments. Without the leaps in character animation made here, we may not have the same level of emotional resonance found in modern titles like The Last of Us or Yakuza. After this tearful goodbye, the player then takes part in Lirim's burial ritual. It's a somber, contemplative moment that creates a fascinating dynamic. Cook and Mac are experiencing death for the first time in their lives, from their mother no less. At the same time, Kaim has experienced countless deaths in his 1000 years of life. Even if he can't remember them all, his emotional stoicism is still present and formed by those experiences. There's a clear valley between these two perspectives, but their connection comes from Lirim herself. Her blood makes them family, and they must equally shoulder the burden of her loss. Small, quiet moments like this can be found throughout Lost Odyssey's main narrative. The opportunities for the story to take a back seat while the characters wrestle with the premise of immortality and the themes of death and duty are sprinkled throughout the game. When it's exploring these ideas, the game is truly at its strongest. That might be why the 1000 Years of Dreams contains the most impactful material in the game. The overarching narrative is a standard good guy uses the power of friendship to defeat the evil guy with godlike powers setup that's seen in many JRPGs. And while I think it's well executed, it's hard to not be disappointed when the initial premise is so unique. The character's immortality is more of a detail than a driving force in the story, only being used as a means to an end for emotional payoffs and a few gameplay mechanics. Gongora himself is a fairly forgettable villain with simplistic motives despite his fascinating origins. Even with a charmingly hammy performance,
It doesn't matter anymore. Everything will end soon. And my reign will begin!
he's not very engaging for most of the narrative. He lurks in the shadows and marionettes his whim, but that ultimately makes him a weak character that loses impact until his plan comes to fruition by the end of the third disc. This is the larger issue with Lost Odyssey's narrative. It rarely realizes the potential found in its premise. The 1000 Years of Dreams are a fantastic exploration of the burden of immortality, the way human struggles repeat, and how we proceed in an often cruel and unforgiving world. The game's main plot, however, rarely touches on these themes, choosing instead to focus on a generic JRPG plotline and safe conventions of the genre. It's still entertaining enough to keep me invested, but did leave me wanting more by the end. While I'm usually more driven by the narrative in JRPGs, Lost Odyssey did keep me coming back with its combat and exploration. Where Blue Dragon allows players to explore an expansive world map and open areas, and Eternal Sonata places the player on a linear track through each location, Lost Odyssey's traversal feels like a happy medium between these two styles. You don't have the option to fully explore the world by land, only by sea and air. Each location you visit is also fairly linear, with towns offering the most exploration in the game. While exploring the open world would have been nice, similar to what was in Blue Dragon, I feel this choice to focus on crafting specific areas is what gives each of them an impressive level of detail and expansiveness. Even still, the linear nature of the dungeons and in-between areas are not without beautiful vistas and challenging puzzles or obstacles. It feels like the work that would have gone into creating the open world was put into adding features and life to each area. While it is fun to explore these areas initially, there is some backtracking involved, especially if you want to complete the various side quests. Luckily, Lost Odyssey includes a wonderful feature that may be its most innovative contribution to the JRPG genre: fast running. In general, Lost Odyssey's traversal is hassle-free, allowing you to focus on solving dungeon puzzles, finding new items, and exploring the expertly crafted world. This focused experience is especially welcome given the traditional random encounter system for battles.
This does not look good!
Lost Odyssey's combat is a mixture of old-school turn-based battles with added spice from various systems that give each encounter a sense of life. Your party of 5 begin each battle in a predetermined formation, either taking the brunt of the hits in the front or playing defensively in the back. Your party members in the back receive additional defense from the team's Guard Condition, or GC. This bar determines the level of defense your back row has from direct hits, and goes down whenever the party members in the front are hit. Once it reaches 0, your back party will receive the full amount of damage. This system works in tandem with the spell system, where magic spells take time to execute. They can take anywhere from the end of the current turn or even multiple turns depending on the spell's power and the character's magic ability. Where Blue Dragon's battle system used timing to determine how long you hold a button, extending fights to laboring lengths, Lost Odyssey's battle order system allows for a similar level of strategy without getting bogged down in too many actions or animations. The one active system that the game employs, called the ring system, works to make physical attacks more engaging. Anytime you attack with a weapon, 2 rings appear on the screen. The goal is to line up the outer ring with the central ring. Depending on where it lands based on the timing of your button presses, you could deal extra damage or instill a status effect like poison or sleep. Each ring provides various effects to your weapons, like elemental damage, increased critical damage, or a larger ring area. You can even craft rings from materials you find in the world, upgrading existing ones to deal more elemental damage or stacking multiple status effects into one ring. Your items and weapons also come with specific passive effects, like increased health, extra money from battles, or resistances to status ailments. These rings and items can be changed on the fly during battle too, ensuring you and your team have the necessary tools to effectively take on each enemy depending on their weaknesses. This level of customization is one of the key features of Lost Odyssey. While you can't drastically change each character's outfits or facial features, you can teach the immortal characters permanent skills from the various items and party members. Each item's ability has a certain number of skill points the character needs to earn while the item is equipped before they learn that skill permanently. That ability then gets added to a pool of other permanent abilities you learn from items or through skill linking with your mortal party members. Mortal characters learn abilities as they level up, usually geared towards their specialized traits or class. Once they learn a skill, an immortal character can link with that ability and learn it through earning skill points. This allows for an insane amount of ability personalization, where battles guarantee definitive rewards through earned skill points. By the end of the game, you can teach all of your immortal characters powerful abilities that negate status effects, make them more effective in combat, and allow for even more ability and item slots. I also found that grinding was not necessary for the majority of the game's 40 to 60 hour runtime. The smooth progression is thanks in part to the game's intelligent pacing. Enemies feel perfectly balanced for each area, including a feature where enemies give less experience and skill points if you're at too high a level, encouraging the player not to grind but instead move on with the story. There's also the side quests sprinkled throughout the game that help keep you stocked on ring crafting materials and usable items. These can range from ongoing collectibles to optional boss fights that truly test your abilities. While I did not complete every single activity in the game, I did feel a drive to do as much as possible, even as the story was ramping up and I could tell I was near the finale. I believe the faster-paced combat, customizable characters, and well-paced scaling create for a more enjoyable experience overall. I remember that by the end of Blue Dragon, I wanted the experience to be over, but by the time I could fight the final boss in Lost Odyssey, I was ready to take on each optional challenge and find each secret item. As I continued to plow through the game's detailed areas and engage in combat, I kept thinking about the themes of immortality, the toll it can take on the mind, and how someone can process a millennia of emotions. While the game may not fully explore these ideas, I couldn't help but wonder, even days, weeks, even months after I had beaten the game. In the last disc of Lost Odyssey, the party finds a secret diary written by Gongora that reveals many of the background details of the world and narrative. We find out that the Immortals are actually beings from another world. They were sent to this world on a mission to investigate emotions, as they manifested in the Immortals world as a pandemic-level disease. Since time moves differently for them in this world than in their original world, the Immortals appear to live forever, when in fact they are only aging slowly. Essentially, 1,000 years in this world counts as 1 year in the other world. After a millennia of wandering the land, joining countless wars, and meeting even more countless people, each Immortal became infected with emotions and created lives for themselves. Almost everyone, like Kaim and Seth, find love, feel heartbreak, and wrestle with mortal conflicts. The 1000 Years of Dreams expresses the sadness and hurt in these characters' past, while the game's main plotline serves to show the potential for the future, or how our memories can help us appreciate the present moment. Despite a pessimistic, nihilistic initial viewpoint,
My body also remembers.
How so?
Just that it was painful. If I happen to remember, and my past didn't amount to much, then I think it's probably better to have never remembered.
the characters ultimately find joy and momentary happiness in their immortality. Despite the heartbreak expressed by the short-term memories, the game ends on a positive note, framing Kaim and the other immortals staying in the human world as a good thing. It's not explained in great detail why these immortal beings seem to suddenly want to stay in this world, especially when they're doomed to experience the same emotional toils they now remember from the past millennium. There's an idea of traumatic memories causing heartache and pain, even though the immortals don't remember the specific traumatic event. They can't recall the details, but the overwhelming feelings linger with them, stewing to create distrust, heartache, and apathy. We see these stoic emotions initially with Kaim, who blindly serves Gongora's whim as a mercenary, while memories of Lyram's supposed death haunt his dreams and at times waking life. He knows something is wrong, this memory is imprinted on him and he can feel it deep down, but he's unable to grasp these intense feelings. Therefore, he becomes callous and distrustful, despite not being able to recollect the memories that made him this way. By the end, Kaim and the other immortals have decided to stay in the mortal world, and still age slowly while the world around them grows and dies off. They choose to continue to live their elongated lives where their loved ones will age and pass on, and they will remain for many millennia to come. While I was ultimately satisfied with this ending, it did leave me asking a lot of questions. Could it be that once the immortals know the context for these strong emotions they've been feeling, once they can see their entire 1,000-year journey, they can properly weigh the negative emotions with the positive, therefore deciding to stay within the mortal world? The game doesn't seem to offer a definitive answer to this question, instead opting to follow the rusty rails of a save-the-world JRPG plotline. On the other end of the spectrum, Gongora uses emotions to become power-hungry and devise a complicated plan to take over the world. Logically, it seems that both outcomes, one of enjoying immortality and one of trying to abuse it, don't make sense when living forever comes with so many drawbacks. You are doomed to watch the world around you make the same mistakes, you lose the ones you love most, and you can't easily forget the painful parts. Maybe this is how emotions can be viewed by someone as a disease, something that needs to be cured in order to survive. Emotions lead to irrational decisions that create immeasurable highs and depressing lows. They also drive us to improve ourselves, care for others, and stand up for what's right. They can also lead to debilitating depression, hurtful outbursts, and short-sighted assumptions. There's a fascinating internal conflict here that unfortunately the game chooses not to fully explore. Instead, it opts to end with a simple everyone gets a happy ending conclusion. It feels as if the narrative simply doesn't take the time in the present to dive into these questions and really get into the meat of how the immortals deal with their past memories. The 1000 Years of Dreams show their experiences and emotions in the past, and their immortality creates interesting combat mechanics, but their character journeys are rarely affected by their immortal status. While I appreciate the ambitions of the story and the inclusion of the 1000 Years of Dreams, I just feel like there's so much untapped potential within this narrative, to the point where I need to spend time in this video basically brain dumping my thoughts and feelings about the themes. I feel like these ideas could be expanded within the world itself, either in a sequel game or another story set in the universe. This lack of depth or explored ideas doesn't make for a less enjoyable experience though. I still found myself invested in the story and characters, blissfully following the standard JRPG plot to its predictable but satisfying end. Sakaguchi is a fantastic storyteller, so even his most generic plotlines are engaging over 40 to 50 hours of gameplay. It's a story that's easy to follow and has enough potential to keep your brain ruminating on the game's themes and emotional moments. It just doesn't quite stick the landing as you might hope. Lost Odyssey is a great example of the potential JRPGs had on the Xbox 360, and the potential Sakaguchi had as a storyteller in that generation of consoles. Its unique premise that informs gameplay mechanics and side content, along with an engaging evolution of turn-based combat and character customization, leads to an extremely engaging 40 to 50 hour journey. While the game is held back by technological hurdles and a narrative disassociation between the main plot and thematic depth, there is still a solid game underneath worth all the praise and love it still receives to this day. Sakaguchi has stated there are no plans for a remaster or a sequel, but I'm more saddened by the lack of output from Mistwalker or support for more traditional games with this much money put into them. As the industry progressed through the 7th console generation into the 8th and current gen, turn-based combat was often reserved for legacy titles like Dragon Quest and Pokemon. The modern top-tier JRPGs of the time were concerned with trying to spice up combat while maintaining the same tired plotlines, appealing to their niche audiences rather than trying to expand. Of course, this narrative has changed as of 2022. Square is actively developing titles like Bravely Default, Octopath Traveler, and Triangle Strategy. Many indie studios are able to get their JRPG-inspired games into the hands of millions, like your Undertales and Bug Fables. Where Lost Odyssey and Blue Dragon were initially criticized for their traditional feel, it's clear now that there has always been a market for high-quality JRPGs, even ones with random encounters and turn-based combat. I often wonder what the modern JRPG landscape would be like if Lost Odyssey had been more successful, if Sakaguchi had received more support for his work at Mistwalker. If the studio had been able to complete their third Xbox 360 JRPG, titled Cryon, would we have seen a new era in JRPGs? Or would it have been another maligned and financially disappointing entry in Sakaguchi's legacy? Unfortunately, we don't have infinite time to ponder these unanswerable questions. We can only continue to live, to explore our pasts, examine how they shaped our present, and make the most of our future. Sakaguchi seems to be doing just fine, having recently released the Apple-exclusive JRPG Fantasian, which has received great praise from critics. Maybe it's for the best that Sakaguchi and Mistwalker got to move on to other projects after Lost Odyssey, as they were initially working on 4 titles simultaneously after they were formed in 2005. But again, these thoughts will never have a definitive answer. Just like Kaim and the other immortals, all we can do is keep living. The future may not always be bright, the past may occasionally haunt us, but moving forward is always better than callous stagnation.
So, Sarah, shall we try for another millennium?
I'd like that. I'm so happy, Kaim.
I don't think the memories will be as painful as they were in the last one.
So once we've raised the children as Lyra asked, then what?
We can take it easy. Eternity's not so bad.